How much does keeping a pet snake really cost? There's no way to tell you an exact price for what you're going to be paying because it varies a lot depending on the species you're getting, where you get your stuff, and all the different things like that. But I'm going to try and help you figure out just how much you can afford and what kind of budget you're going to need to keep different species of snakes. If you're watching this video, I'm guessing you're more of a beginner when it comes to keeping animals, unless you're just a really dedicated subscriber. But we're going to be talking more about costs of different snakes for more beginner-like snakes like ball pythons, corn snakes, other colubrids, Kenyan sand boas, and other smaller size snakes like these. Nothing that needs super fancy food like a full rabbit every week or some massive enclosure. Before we get into it, I'm going to have a ton of products I suggest and a ton that I'll be talking about available in the description through the links that'll say kit.com, because that's where I have a ton of my favorite products listed. If you make any purchases through these links, I am an Amazon affiliate, which means that you're actually helping me out because I get a small commission each time you make a purchase, so that's just something to keep in mind. So firstly, there's the prices of the snakes themselves. I'm not really going to cover this because it varies so much. You can just kind of figure this out on your own. Most snakes are going to go from maybe $25 up to like $10,000 or $20,000. So there's a massive range, but there's that. But we're going to go ahead and talk about the actual setup itself and then the monthly costs. So enclosures, you have a lot of different options when it comes to this. Some people simply keep their snakes in plastic tubs, and as long as they're the appropriate size, these work completely fine. You can still regulate the temperatures and humidities. Some people say they're better than tanks or aquariums, others disagree, but both work fine. Lots of people use both. These tubs are only going to cost like maybe $5 to $25 or $20 depending on what size it is. So that's a really cheap option. If you want to get a bit fancier, well, fancier, it might not necessarily be better depending on who you ask, but aquariums are another option. These are primarily what I use in my room. They're made for fish. They can hold water, but I don't need them to. You can find these for pretty cheap sometimes, like different stores like Petco and PetSmart, even though I know we aren't fans of those stores. And if you are a fan, you can watch this video. But sometimes they have things like dollar per gallon sales where you can get, say, a 40 gallon for $40, a 10 gallon for $10. It's an okay deal, I guess. I still avoid these places, but they kind of get you when it comes to the actual enclosure lids, because they're usually the same price as the enclosure. A $20 aquarium is usually going to need a $20 lid. So that means going from, say, maybe a 10 to 40 or 55 gallon aquarium is going to cost between, I would say, about $20 and $120. Keep in mind, a lot of these prices are just my estimations and just my guesses based on what I've paid for and what other people pay for and what I see available. So these could definitely vary a lot as we get into these. If you want to get something actually made more for a snake or reptile, these usually cannot hold water, but they're usually a bit more lightweight, and they have latching tops, which is a lot more convenient because the snakes can push those aquarium lids off if you don't buy them latches. But if you do go for one of these, whether it looks like an aquarium and has a latching top, whether it's one of the really cool Exoterras with the opening front doors with a latch, these are going to be the most expensive. You're usually going to find these, again, probably around 10 to 50 gallons or so. They're going to be around $50 to $400 because these do get quite a bit fancier, and they include the lid with them. Sometimes they also come with some little extra features like extra ventilation that you can open or close, and then the glass doors on the front can be really convenient. So these are much nicer enclosures, but they are pretty expensive. I only have like a couple of these. And then you can always, of course, custom build your snake and enclosure, but I've never done that, so I can't really help you out with prices with that. But because of all these different variations, you can expect your snake's enclosure to cost between, say, $20 to $200. That's usually the range you're going to be looking at. And on average, I would expect to pay just around $80 US to buy your snake and enclosure. I would consider that the average when it comes to between like small and large snakes. So it might be more expensive, it might be cheaper, but that's the general average that I would give it. Heating and lighting is of course going to be really important for your snake. The best way to heat your enclosure is with an under tank heater. The under tank heaters though are usually around $10 to $40 or $10 to $50 each. This is going to vary on the size of your enclosure. I would say like a 40 gallon enclosure might be able to have a heat mat that's between like $20 to $40, while a 10 gallon enclosure might only be $10 to $20 for that heat mat. But keep in mind, you're usually going to need a reptile thermostat for these. I don't use them with all of my enclosures, but I highly suggest it, especially for the larger sized heat mats, because burns can be very serious, and unfortunately they're somewhat common in snakes when you don't regulate them with thermostats. These thermostats are usually like, let me check, I forgot. The thermostats are usually like $20 to $50. The analog ones are usually going to be a bit cheaper, even though I kind of prefer these just because they seem more effective and they're a bit easier to use. And then the digital ones are more like $30 to $50. So snakes definitely need some sort of lighting during the day, so they do have a day and night cycle. Many people suggest UVBs for all snakes because it does give them extra vitamins and encourages them to bask and come out. And I agree, not all of my animals have UVBs yet, but I am starting to add them to all of my enclosures. But even if you just do a normal heat lamp, you don't necessarily need a heat lamp if you're going to be doing a reptile thermostat, or if you're just putting some sort of normal bulb or LED or something. So if the snake has light, the prices will vary a bit. Well, when I say a bit, I kind of mean a lot, because these can be as cheap as like $5 or $10 per bulb. But if you get super fancy and get some sort of really nice panel, it could be up to $200 or so. Some of the bulbs are going to need lamp reflectors, which are usually about 10 to 20 bucks. But when it comes down to it, all of the heating and lighting stuff will be about $30 to $100 or so altogether. I would put this right around 60 bucks because you're not going to necessarily need all of this stuff, but usually you're going to need at least a heat mat, a thermostat, some sort of bulb, and then maybe a reflector for that bulb if it needs one. Then for the enclosure, there's additional items like substrates, water bowls, highs, and different things. But this varies a lot because you can actually make quite a few of these things yourself, which I talk about in a money saving tips video, which I did like last year, I think. So that means that substrate is usually going to be between, say, whoa, what are you doing? Between like 5 and 30 bucks. Some snakes can simply have paper towel as their substrate, which is just a few dollars for some rolls of paper towel. And then other snakes need to burrow, so you should get them a real substrate that's actually made for them. And then of course, depending on the size of the enclosure, you might need more or less substrate, but I would say just around 5 to 30 is what you can expect for that. Water bowls, you can make these yourself, which I also talk about in that video, which I have linked with a card. So if you make it yourself, that's like $0 to $1. But if you don't want to make a water bowl and get one that's actually heavy or looks nicer and isn't as easy for the animals to spill, these are usually just up to like $15 to $20. So expect paying between like $0 to $15 for this. And then the hides for your snakes, you can also make these yourself, which means they can also be around just a couple dollars each. But each individual hide will be about $15. You might just need one hide, you might want to go with 2. But for one hide, it would be around $1 to $15 or so. And then there's accessories. You don't necessarily need accessories, but the more things you add to the enclosure, well, 1, the nicer it might look, and 2, the more comfortable your snakes can feel because they'll feel nice and secure. So this is a huge range. If you really just don't go with much, it might just be like $5 to toss a couple extra things in there. But then if you do want to really max it out and make it look really nice, this could be anywhere between like $50 to $100+, but that's really up to you based on how much money you want to spend with that. So for all of these additional items, I'd say you could spend anywhere between like $5 if you do decide to make a bunch of this stuff and go the cheaper, more simple route, up to like $100+ if you do get a bit more fancy. I would say the average for this is just around 40 bucks. That's usually what I would spend for all the accessories in the enclosure with the water bowl and hide and everything. So that's pretty much everything when it comes to the actual enclosure itself. But now we're going to talk about the monthly costs you're going to have to go through for your snake. The first thing, of course, being food, because that's pretty important. The price of each mouse or rat varies a lot depending on where you get it and how many you get at a time. If you just go to a pet store, they're usually going to be in packs of like 1 to 5, so they're going to be more expensive. While if you order either online or in bulk, they're usually cheaper, where they come in packs of like 10 up to 100 or more. The second thing that changes the price of this mouse or rat is, well, 1, whether it is a mouse or rat, and 2, how large it is, because rats are going to be more expensive and they get larger than the mice. Probably the cheapest you'll find a mouse is 25 to 50 cents. That would be like a pinky mouse or something if you buy them in bulk. And then each one will go up to about $3 each, especially if you're buying these in pretty small packs. For me, on average, it's probably like $1.50 when it comes out to all of the mice I feed, and that would be for 1 mouse or rat per week per snake. So yeah, I'd say the average is about 50 cents to $3. I'd say the average is about 50 cents to $3 per mouse, which would come out to about $2 to $12 per month to feed your snake. If you do decide to use a UVB bulb on your enclosure, they are not permanent because you have to replace them. The UVB basically runs out. I don't fully understand how it all works, but I just do know that they usually last about 6 months to a year. Depending on how fancy of a bulb it is and how often you have to replace it, this could cost between probably $10 and $60 a year For example, the tube lights are usually more expensive, and I believe they need to be replaced more often, while just the usual more average shaped bulbs, I guess you could say, usually only need to be replaced once a year or so, and they're all around just cheaper. So this will come out to about $1 to $5 a month to replace that UVB if you decide to use one with your snake. So substrate, some people do go in and replace all the substrate in their enclosure, maybe a few times a year, maybe more frequently, and some people don't at all. I really only do if I think an enclosure needs it, like if they, I don't know, if it starts looking old, or if we could just use a revamp, then I'd do it. So I'd say that's probably like $15 to $20 a year. We'll say 24 just to make the math easier. So that comes out to about $2 a month if you just do replace that substrate, maybe a few times a year. So the monthly costs for your snake definitely vary a lot like the rest of the things, but based on my estimations and based on what I do, it's about $5 to $20 per snake per month, and that comes out to about $60 to $240 a year to keep maintaining your snake. I would say probably the average is about 10 bucks a month, and that would be $120 a year. That's about what you could expect depending on the species. So something you may or may not have thought about is the vet for your reptile. Luckily, they don't need annual visits. They don't need vaccines or different things like this. So that's not as expensive. Luckily, I've only had to take a snake to the vet once, and it turns out he was fine. However, just that basic physical was like $60 to $80 or something. So there's no guarantee that you'll have to go to the vet at all, but because every animal can get sick, it's good to keep this in mind and maybe try and keep some money aside in case something does come up, because sometimes you just can't avoid it. But yeah, like I said, that's rare, but this means that this could be anywhere from $0 to maybe $100. And if something really bad has happened, which is going to be super rare and something you really don't need to worry about, but still good to just keep in mind a little bit, it could go up into the hundreds of dollars because vets are expensive, especially exotic vets. But luckily, that's not something you're usually going to have to deal with. Whoa, my voice, what's happening? So that's just about everything you're gonna have to pay for. Of course, there might be extra little things here and there, like, I don't know, maybe small things like water conditioner, snake tongs, just different little things that you might want to end up purchasing. But overall, this is all the general stuff you end up going to have to pay for to make your snake's enclosure and then maintain that snake on a monthly or yearly basis. There's a lot of variety, so remember that I just tried to estimate the best I could based on what I have to do to care for my animals, and just based on general pricing and what I'm pretty sure most people are gonna have to pay for. But overall, you can expect it to cost about $50 to $400 to actually get everything going for your snake's enclosure. But the average would come out to about $180 for this, so I would try and make sure you have at least $100 or $200 ready to go to make this setup. Of course, you can make it a lot cheaper, especially if you find things for lower costs, if you make like the hide and water bowl yourself, and then based on what types of substrate and things you pick, and then of course the species of snake itself, because different snakes are going to need different size enclosures and things like that. I would then expect about an additional $10 a month or so for the upkeep when that comes to UVB replacements, substrates, and of course food. And then the vet bills are going to vary a lot. Hopefully you won't have to deal with any at all, but it is a possibility to keep in mind. Hopefully it's helped you out a bit. Let me know anything else you can think of in the comments. And again, I have links in the description to all of my favorite things. They all go to Amazon links, which are always the cheapest, or at least the cheapest I can find, compared to pet stores. I'm guessing that's because you're buying directly from the sellers most of the time. But if you want to check those out, like I said, I can get a commission for that, so it's a way to support the channel. But that'll be it for this video. So I'm Alex, thanks for watching.